Whenever you're a kid, your means of entertainment is pretty limited. However, if you were born in the 2000s and you watched the Disney Channel, you had a great childhood. Why? Phineas and Ferb. Probably one of the shows that I harbour the most nostalgia for. One of my fondest memories being that I was with my friend Jack watching the premiere of Phineas and Ferb Across the Second Dimension in 2011. This being one of my favourite Disney films period, with fantastic music, experimental animation for Phineas and Ferb anyways, and a great story with genuine stakes and a unique premise that anyone can enjoy. That was 2011 though. I was 7. It would have been the perfect ending for the show, except it wasn't, and there was 2 more seasons that came after it. I fell out of Phineas and Ferb shortly after seeing the movie. I'd watch this show if it came on, but slowly and gradually, my grasp in the series loosened, to the point where I completely missed the show's finale in 2015. And then came April 2019, where it was revealed that they were working on a new Phineas and Ferb movie. This movie was called Candace Against the Universe, and was dubbed as a lost episode of sorts. When I first heard the news, I was skeptical, because they were making a movie for the streaming service 5 years after the original series ended. Not the characters, mind you, but anyways, for me, Phineas and Ferb were a closed book, and then they said streaming service. Boy, I can't wait. Hi, my name is Andrew, and I make videos on media. This is my opinion, and if you enjoy Phineas and Ferb the movie, Candace Against the Universe, all the more power to you. And if you haven't watched the movie yourself, here's your spoiler warning. Just go watch the film first, please. And the title was inspired by Nintendo's video. I thought I'd said it before I get comments on it, so without further ado, addressing these films, Across the Second Dimension and Candace Against the Universe both have an overarching story which revolves around a certain character in the world, other than Phineas and Ferb. In Across the Second Dimension, that character we focus on is Perry. As in that film, Dan and Swampy explore the repercussions if the boys find out about Okka, and all the pedantics around Perry, his relationship with Doofenshmirtz, etc. In Candace Against the Universe, surprisingly enough, Candace is the main focus, as it's all about her internal struggles with having no fun and ultimately not being special. Being special being the entire crux of the story. The story being your stereotypical Phineas and Ferb plot. Boys make something, Candace goes irate and tries to report it, fails, obviously. Difference being, this all happens in the first few minutes of the film, and it's not a 12-minute episode, but rather, it's an 86-minute long movie. Anyways, Candace finds some dodgy machine in the front lawn, bashes on it, gets hoisted up to the planet Roblox or whatever it's called, with Vanessa, whilst the B-plot is Phineas and Ferb trying to get to said planet with their friends, Doof and Perry, but I'll mention Perry, because he can't show himself to be a pet and an agent. And if they found out, Perry would have to leave, despite Doofenshmirtz literally not being able to tell the difference. Now, a counter-argument could be,
Andrew, they had their memories wiped.
Yeah, everyone but Okka, so it's a plot hole for Monogram and Perry to not be aware of this. There's bigger fish to fry, that being this alien planet called Planet Robobot or whatever. The main antagonist of the film is called Super Big Doctor, and her villainy isn't present until the last act. Along with her name being really stupid, her character is almost entirely a reflection of Candace, so that she can grow as a character. It's a really common trope in storytelling, and it's usually hard to tell, unless you know what you're looking for. Although, with our good friend, Super Big Doctor, they made it as obvious as they possibly can for this character to just be a reflected version of Candace. And then comes the ultimate plot device. This little plant-looking thing. That, weirdly enough, looks to be where a majority of the animation budget went to. Essentially, the main conflict of the film is a joke, and was a last-minute idea on the antagonist's part. That being, that they were going to use Candace to make carbon dioxide to fuel a wee plant to mind control. Whatever these are. Then, Candace mentions that everyone on Earth produces carbon dioxide. Then Super Big Doctor gets the idea to just take over Earth. And then we get an annoyingly long action sequence which is all centric around an offhanded comment. There is one story tidbit in this film that I enjoy, that being the plant grew too big to handle and actually eats Super Big Doctor. And then we really do have bigger fish to fry. The bigger fish being thwarted in a really random and anticlimactic way, and comes from an offhand comment. Again! Alright, I'm sorry that I've butchered the plot of the movie. If I came off overly aggressive and pessimistic, that wasn't my intention, and there is actually some good stuff in the film that I will talk about now. There are songs, which is Phineas and Ferb's strong point. There aren't many, mind you, but they're there, and they're enjoyable enough. The writing in the movie is as quirky as the original show, albeit for a few annoying moments at times. But the charm is still there in spades, and it did make me do an audible at times. There was a great scene at the climax of the movie where Candace connects with Phineas and Ferb. It genuinely felt like payoff for Candace, feeling terrible the entire time. Well, that's enough of the stuff I like. Now onto the stuff I don't like. The animation in this movie is most likely the biggest point of contention, and understandably so, because it's not very good, in the first half anyways, and there's a few reasons why. The easiest explanation being the change in animation studios. The original show Phineas and Ferb was animated by a lot of studios as it was a full-blown TV show, most notorious of which being Rough Draft Studios, with studios in California and Seoul in South Korea. They're one of the more famous studios as they have a massive portfolio of work they've done. The most famous series they've done being Family Guy, The Simpsons, SpongeBob. I'm just using Rough Draft as an example here. They didn't animate every episode of the show, obviously, but considering Phineas and Ferb ran for 8 years, each studio had time to gradually adjust to the art style, which is why there were a lot more off-model shots in the first season. Bing bada boom, and that's literally every show. I mean, yeah. But difference being that the studios that animated Candace Against the Universe had no experience working on Phineas and Ferb. All but one anyways. I presume this is why the film looks so off in some areas. There is another reason why the film doesn't look as good as it probably should, and that is mostly down to quarantine. I'm aware that Dan and Swampy said that they finished the film in lockdown, although they still threw scenes around different studios in lockdown, and I reckon this all contributes to why it looks so off in some areas. By off I mean oddly thick lines and characters looking sort of off-model at times. I don't think Phineas and Ferb is the most attractive show. It looks pretty bland in some areas, and the characters, they're about the most unique thing the show has going for it. But Candace Against the Universe just irks me in the way that it somehow looks worse than the original show. And if you want a fair comparison to draw here, it looks worse than Across the Second Dimension. The obvious conclusion I came to is that Candace Against the Universe had a smaller budget and less time to be made. Although, that contradicts a comment on Dan Puvenmeyer's TikTok, where he states that they had 6 months longer and a larger budget. Ultimately, the question still remains, why does the film look the way it does? I believe it's mostly down to quarantine and the studios having lack of experience with the show. But that only explains it. It doesn't make it okay. Overall, despite the movie having more time put into it than Across the Second Dimension, I still think it falls flat story-wise. And this is for a couple of reasons. 1. It doesn't feel unique. At least I don't think it does. Aliens have already been explored as a concept in Milo Murphy's Law, and in Phineas and Ferb, for some reason, the Roblox aliens, or whatever they're called, just look like a combination of the basic aliens from Milo Murphy's Law and the Pistachio Fellas. 2. The plot feels really familiar. It feels like it already was from an episode of Phineas and Ferb. Because it sorta was. Unfair Science Forever Ducks was an episode of Phineas and Ferb which focused on Candace going to Mars and having a high amount of value. It's funnier in the way that Candace goes through mental anguish in the start of the episode only to have her fantasies fulfilled, thanks to aliens. And at the end of the episode, she appreciates her surroundings, and Candace Against the Universe has an extremely similar premise, that being Candace feels worthless and not special. She impulsively does something that results in her being on a planet. The species on said planet values Candace because she has something they don't. Ultimately, Candace learns a lesson and joins fight against aliens. Keep in mind, this is a massive generalization. I understand that me comparing an episode to the movie could be seen as unfair, as if you really delve into them, they are quite different in some aspects, but on paper, Candace Against the Universe just seems like a more grandiose version of Unfair Science Forever Ducks, which is a fair judgment I feel because one is an 11-minute long episode compared to the other, which is 85. They obviously had to involve more plot beats in the movie to pad out the time, which they didn't do that well, in my opinion. Vanessa was inserted into the plot in a really artificial way, and she doesn't do that much to the story, other than foreshadow the redemption of Super Big Doctor and shoehorn Doof into the story. The pace of the movie isn't that great either. Sometimes it moves too fast and sometimes it moves too slow. And the jokes are hit and miss, and this being paired with the lackluster animation in some areas just makes it awkward at times. Like when Phineas and Ferb say Roblox cluster several times, and the second time they do it, they look so lifeless. There's another poorly timed joke in the film, that being whenever the characters just revert in form until you see Dan and Swampy, and then you see the cast again as they just awkwardly stare into the camera for several seconds. Firstly, this joke is incredibly common as of recent, best example here being the Gumball rendition, and secondly, the music was becoming more intense, and then, whenever it cuts back to the movie, all the tension tension built by the scene is lost as the characters just goofily stare into your soul. From a film perspective, this movie is just so lackluster compared to Across the Second Dimension, and personally, it's for a reason that isn't really brought up in reviews. Candace against the universe. I really hate saying that, I'm just going to call it CADU in the future. CADU uses linear storytelling, which is the same format a majority of Phineas and Ferb uses, and even in that formula, CADU isn't unique in any way. Across the Second Dimension is effective at using non-linear storytelling in order to entice the viewer. As that movie starts off at the penultimate point, the doom of the cast is imminent as the camera pans over lava and the boys are about to get fed to a giant monster. Stakes are at an all-time high. Then Phineas mentions this morning, and next thing you know, you have an upbeat song about Perry. If you're a child watching this, you get so many questions, this enticing you to watch the rest of the film. And what makes it even better is that it's different from the usual show. CADU starts off in a different way, but in a way that doesn't entice you to watch it. It recaps the events of the original show in a song. It's the best way they could have introduced a movie about Candace 5 years after the show ended, but considering how much better Across the Second Dimension is at this, it just goes to show CADU is extremely boring in comparison. I'm only comparing these movies because I had such high expectations for the movie, especially considering it came after Across the Second Dimension. However, after watching it, it just floundered in the most depressing way possible. I guess that's really because fundamentally, Across the Second Dimension has a far more interesting premise. I did a podcast with my friend GeekToons where we discussed CADU, and apart from ranting about my love for Seth MacFarlane, I made up a premise which in my opinion is far more interesting than the movie we actually got. That being, why not make a movie where Phineas and Ferb go back to school and have their creative heads oppressed by the school system, and then have the message be, don't be afraid to be yourself. Now, this could be comparable to the episode where Phineas and Ferb shaved their head, but if CADU can do it, so can we. But I think the idea alone is quite compelling. But then again, I'm just spitballing. I ultimately think that Candace against the universe ruined Phineas and Ferb in the manner that the series already ended off on an incredibly high note. Considering this movie had so much going against it in terms of animation, premise in my opinion, I don't know. Phineas and Ferb CADU left a bad taste in my mouth. That's just me though, and if you feel differently, tell me why. I'm open to having my mind changed. Either way though, hopefully I didn't piss off too many people, and thanks for watching, bye.